So in simple terms, can you explain what glyphosate is and how it became such a widespread chemical in modern agriculture?
Sure, yes. So glyphosate is the active ingredient in the herbicide Roundup. We know it as Roundup here. There are many other formulations, but Roundup is the really popular one here in the United States. People go down to the hardware store, pick it up, and garden store, get some glyphosate to kill the dandelions in their yard, and they think nothing of it. They don't use any kind of protection when they use it. The kids could be playing in the lawn. They don't realize that it's toxic, and that's very dangerous. And of course, then they use it all over the food supply. And I didn't realize the extensiveness of the use on the food supply until I started reading. And they introduced these GMO Roundup Ready crops in the late 1990s, and they were rolled out pretty swiftly. They started rising to being like 90% of the crop for corn and soy and canola and sugar beets and alfalfa. Those are kind of the core GMO crops that have been engineered to resist glyphosate. They can get sprayed all you want and it doesn't kill them, so it becomes a very efficient way to kill the weeds, to maintain control of the weeds without killing the plant. So they managed to do the studies in such a way as to deceive the government into thinking that it was safe. And once they got EPA approval, it's very hard to undo that. So at the moment, the EPA still thinks glyphosate is awesome. It's completely harmless to humans, but it kills all these weeds. And so it's so perfect, keeps our food cheap. They are very resistant to the idea that it might be toxic. And so it's been very difficult to change their minds, even though many, many papers are coming out, especially in the last few years, showing more and more kinds of trouble that glyphosate is causing in humans and in rats and in insects, all across the ecosystem. Glyphosate is really hurting life forms, and we really need to. The government needs to wake up. And I'm hopeful, of course, with the new administration in the United States. I don't know if you've been following that, but we have RFK Jr., who's in charge of HHS, Human Health Sciences, and he's going to make a difference, I think, in changing the government's attitude towards the toxic chemical exposures and helping us to solve the autism crisis.
Absolutely.
Right. So, what impact does glyphosate have environmentally, and which species, obviously besides humans, does it have the most impact on?
I think it pretty much hurts every living form. It has a very, and my book writes about my theory, which I believe is true. And the more I look, the more convinced I am that I'm right. But my theory is not being accepted by the chemical industry. So I'm in a bit of a battle there, I could say. But I believe that glyphosate operates by a unique mechanism and I talk about it in my book, of being mistaken for the amino acid glycine during protein synthesis. It's a very specific mechanism of toxicity. And what happens is that it gets into certain proteins, and I have a specification of what I call a glyphosate susceptibility motif, certain pattern in the protein that is defined very well by the enzyme that glyphosate famously suppresses in the plants, which is this EPSP synthase. And so you can read my book to get the technical details, but basically glyphosate is when the protein is being made, according to the code, the DNA code, when it sees a code for glycine, it sees glyphosate and puts it in there instead of glycine, because glyphosate is a glycine molecule. It's a complete glycine molecule, except it has extra material stuck onto its nitrogen atom. So as long as there's room for that extra material, it can go in, it'll fit. And then when it gets into the protein, certain proteins, certain places, certain glycines have tremendous susceptibility to disruption of the protein if that glycine is swapped out for glyphosate. The protein can become dead in the water and it can become toxic. I mean, many different things can happen to proteins if that glycine gets substituted. And I can predict what would happen by studying the research literature on glycine mutations and things like that.
So besides autism, what are some of the other harmful effects on the human body?
Well, there's a huge list of diseases. Yeah, there's a huge list of diseases that are going up in prevalence in the United States, exactly in step with the rise in glyphosate usage, which has been going up exponentially since 2000. So we're getting more and more glyphosate exposure every year. And we can see that the diseases are going up as well. Our country is very sick. And I think that's part of why Trump got elected, because RFK Jr. has been saying our country is sick. We need to fix it. We need to figure it out. And glyphosate is going to be a major part, I think. If we can get rid of the glyphosate, we will start to see improvements. A big one is obesity. You know, we have a huge problem with obesity in this country. And of course, diabetes and fatty liver disease that come from the obesity problem. All of that's tied together. And all of that, I think, is due to primarily the exposure to glyphosate. It disrupts the gut microbiome. And the gut microbiome plays a critical role in so many different health issues. And different people are affected different ways because their microbes get disrupted in different ways. So the microbiome is a very complex group of microbes that are working harmoniously together to do all the things that they do for the host, which is really legion. They do so many things for the host. And when certain microbes get killed off by glyphosate, those functions don't happen. And then you get sick because of deficiencies, because of toxicities of metabolites produced by the microbes. Lots of ways in which disruption of the gut microbiome causes a huge list of diseases, including diseases of the brain like Parkinson's disease and autism, of course.
Right. So outside the US, like, have you come across any other, like, say, country like India where glyphosate usage is high? Like,
Well, I'm aware that India uses a lot of glyphosate. I don't think you're as bad as we are. I think Brazil and the United States are probably number one, number two. I'm not sure which one is number one, but we're both really bad, Brazil and the United States. Europe uses less, Mexico uses less, Canada uses a lot also, probably comparable to the United States. And I think Australia uses quite a bit. And India, I think, is not as bad. Africa is actually much, much better. And the Africans have their health to show for that. I think that the fact that the Africans were very resistant to COVID-19, a factor might be the lack of exposure to glyphosate, because glyphosate creates the diseases that are comorbidities with severe COVID. So when people who are overweight, people who have diabetes, they're more susceptible to severe disease when they catch COVID. And we have so many people with those problems that we end up with a much worse record. We have an incredibly high mortality rate from COVID-19 compared to other countries, which is correlated with our sad state of affairs in our health in general.
So, doctor, can you talk more about chronic diseases? What's
right. So,
Say that again.
sorry. So, can you talk about the impact on chronic diseases? You touched upon obesity, diabetes. How exactly does glyphosate impact chronic diseases in humans?
Yeah, so of course it's complicated, and it really has a lot to do with the specific enzymes that glyphosate disrupts. And of course, beginning with the gut microbiome, and that's a critical place to start, because glyphosate preferentially kills beneficial bacteria like bifidobacteria and lactobacillus that are crucial in the infant gut. So even the infant getting exposed to glyphosate from the formula, soy-based formula, or even from the breast milk, because glyphosate's been found in breast milk, the gut microbiome gets disrupted. And then you get an overgrowth of toxic species that produce toxic metabolites. Products that the pathogens are producing can actually travel to the brain and cause damage to the brain. There's a critical role for the short chain fatty acids that the microbes normally would produce. And those are, for example, butyrate. There's a lot of talk about butyrate lately in America. Many people are aware of the importance of the short chain fatty acid butyrate for the gut, for the colonocytes in the colon. So to keep the colon healthy, you need a lot of butyrate. That's their colonocytes' favorite food. And the butyrate is produced by the gut microbes through fermentation from the foods that you eat. They convert it into butyrate. And when the colonocytes don't have enough butyrate, they get sick. And that gives you things like inflammatory bowel disease. It can give you ultimately colon cancer. And these are diseases that are going up dramatically, exactly in step with glyphosate. So part of it is just messing up the microbes. They also provide critical, B vitamins for the host, and the actual shikimate pathway that's disrupted in the gut microbes is the source of 3 essential amino acids, the aromatic amino acids. They're part of the coding of all the proteins. So those can become deficient. And furthermore, those amino acids are precursors to many biologically active molecules, including neurotransmitters, the skin tanning agent, melanin, melatonin, which is for sleep. We have an epidemic in sleep disorder, not enough melatonin. serotonin, dopamine, all these neurotransmitters that are essential for the mood, and for your and things like anxiety, all of these conditions that we have, depression, anxiety, which are all going up dramatically in our society, I think can be explained by the insufficient production of these neurotransmitters and hormones that come out of that shikimate pathway, which glyphosate disrupts. And over half of our microbes in our gut are susceptible to glyphosate through that shikimate pathway disruption.